Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Joe Riley, CEO of Censia Talent Intelligence. Censia was built to transform the way enterprise companies hire talent. Joe, I'm so excited to chat with you, not only because we both share a similar industry, but particularly your background, your experience as an entrepreneur, and what other advice that you've seen that it could translate to other founders, but also talent and the whole talent problem that a lot of companies are having, big and small. It doesn't necessarily matter, but everyone's fighting to find the best people and people in terms of in the background experience that really match well with the companies that they work for. But before we get into all that good stuff, what was more challenging, training for the FBI or building a company? Go.
Oh, that's really nice. I was an athlete when I joined the FBI, so I will say that building a company is by far harder than training for the FBI. It was a lot shorter, like narrower scope, I will say, than building a company.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing before you started building Censia, once you went through the training and then honestly just jumped straight into kind of entrepreneurship and this whole journey that you've been on for a while now.
Yeah. So for me, I went to undergrad at University of Virginia, which I loved. I was recruited to the FBI in undergrad and worked for them right out of school and absolutely loved what I did. I just hated the bureaucratic structure. So learned pretty early on, luckily in my career, that I liked merit-based systems. And that's kind of what really kicks me off into entrepreneurship. And I think often entrepreneurship finds people rather than people. You don't go out and they're like, I'm going to study to be the best one. Like it can't be the grit it takes to be an entrepreneur is something that I do think that you're early on you have. So after I left the FBI, I built my first company. I was 22. I sold it when I was 24. And that kind of kicked off the journey for me of kind of I loved being an entrepreneur, and I've had just an amazing journey since. Censia is actually my fourth company, and I've sold companies, I've bought companies, I've been through an IPO, I've been through a house takeover, I've been through all sorts of things that the journey of learning is really unique and special. And I think the biggest piece with Censia is it's kind of all of the previous experience learnings all bottled into one. And it's kind of what I think has been critical for our success.
I love that. And just to speak to the early founders who are early in their career, describe the first opportunity. What got you involved into that startup? And then how did you build it into a company that was then acquired, which is a lot of the end goals for a lot of founders?
Yeah, I think really that company came from, I went into sales and did incredibly well and kind of didn't even know really I didn't actually know that was something that I was passionate about. Telling the story of companies, I think, especially in general when we're startups, is telling our own story is critical, but finding people and teaching people how to tell our story and be the communication from great products to great customers and making sure that they constantly grow and develop is one of the harder things to do. And so eventually one of my future clients, this is how the company started. And they were like, look, you are the best salesperson we have ever, out of thousands of people we've ever worked with. Like, we're going to give you your own company and we'll be your exclusive client. And we want you only to represent us. And I was like, oh, okay. Wait, how do I do that? Who's got What's the 101 playbook? So I love what you're doing here, which is really helping people kind of understand the journey and the shared experience of entrepreneurship, because it is, what I guess the biggest learning I learned through that journey was that it's all about the type of people you hire.
Yeah. And it's really a trial by fire in getting into that opportunity. And I'm curious because not only have you brought companies from 0 to 1, but you've also, like you mentioned, led companies to an IPO. And describe the different challenges in terms of the CEO and their responsibilities, how they change and shift, and the different challenges that they face at these different milestones that you've seen.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the thing that I've learned through that is that putting the company in the right position for success. And so we were, every time, whether it's even in every fundraise, is that balance between a lot of the times for an entrepreneur is deciding, do I want this crazy overvalued valuation, or do I want to actually consistently show growth and strength? And it's going through that journey early in my life of just watching companies really rapidly scale and it is important, I think, always to kind of do a check-in and be like, actually, it's really relevant for us to do measured growth and at the
Sure.
same time have consistent growth, because the team loves that. They stay loyal, your investors stay loyal, your customers stay loyal, everything kind of works out. But I think the big thing is putting the company in the right position for success. A lot of people hate not performing.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that was a huge realization, is like, no, I want to put out numbers and then I want to beat those numbers. And I think that what I learned is so does the rest of my team.
Yeah.
And so being really young and putting the company in this, just what we had to achieve as far as our own growth, as far as our own success, and not taking your best performance or your best performing person and thinking that everyone can be like them, and just making sure that the right people are in the right jobs. I think also seeing a lot of times we've hired people that we've moved into different functions, and it's like, oh, you're not great at this, but you are fantastic at that. And so I think the big thing is for our founders is always to remember that we are dealing with real people and helping them find and I tell people a lot, I'm not great at a lot of things, but I'm really world-class at a few things. And it's about spending my time doing those and hiring people that are world-class at the things I'm not good at.
Yeah.
And really putting people in the right job to get out of their way, but it's harder to do than you think.
Yeah, exactly. And like you mentioned a few times, it's bringing the right people, having the right team around you, and then fostering that team. But obviously, Censia, you focus on talent. And one thing that was interesting for me in particular was this idea of this talent data crisis. And it was mentioned a few times over, but describe to the audience what you saw and what kind of was the catalyst to building Censia, and what did this whole theme of the talent data and this the crisis that a lot of companies are seeing?
Totally. What's really interesting, after I had been through a couple companies, I was like, if I'm going to do this again, build another company, it has to be huge. And really I leaned on just other executives to kind of tell me their pain points that they were dealing with.
Yeah.
And over and over and over again, CEOs that I would meet with that were from some of the biggest companies to startups to companies that have consistently they've always, across every industry, they've just been there and they've been steady.
Yeah.
Every company was struggling with the same thing. They all said that talent was their greatest asset. They all said that their biggest challenge was finding great talent, and that if they couldn't find great talent for the future to go through this time of transformation, they actually wouldn't survive.
Yeah.
And that was shocking to me. I was like, how is it that we have a $250 billion industry, just HR technology? Like, why can't we solve that pain point? And I remember I said to one of my co-founders when we started Censia, I was like, I want to be able to put anybody in a system and instantly see people like them, like look-alike modeling, if you will. And he's like, oh, you can't do that. I was like, why not? And he's like, because the data's a mess. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, all the data is user-generated, it's not structured. And it was this moment of click, where understanding that if you look at every platform out there, anyone can say anything about what they do. And they create incredible number of variations of title, the same titles, right? The countless numbers of skills that are maybe meaning the same: B2B sales, business-driven sales, enterprise sales, corporate sales. They're all different ways to say the same thing. And there's countless ways to do that. But the problem is that all technologies, HR technologies or talent technologies, have been keyword search, because this is such a big problem that we were like, well, we got to solve that. We got to create the taxonomies and ontologies on this data to really be able to start to look at people based on things beyond keywords and based on success and capability and future success, rather than keywords and subjective bias, which is really where a lot of the time talent decisions were being made. And not just around who you hire, but who you promote, how you pay your workforce, where you put your workforce, all sorts of things are just really, those decisions are so critical for the company. And yet the technologies that they had required so much manual work that we looked at it and said, how can we use data to do much more intelligent decision-making around people and much fairer decision-making and much faster decision-making around people, because this could truly change a $1 trillion industry, if you will.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about even the example you said with the different titles, for instance, because they seemingly mean the same thing, but there's micro differences in the amount of for the corporate sales versus enterprise sales versus commercial, the amount of volume you handle, how the deal size is, and all these little intricate details that mean a lot to companies. But I guess from a founder to founder here, how do you kind of conceptualize data? Do you index the data in a particular way? Are you labeling it? Are you training models to essentially create relationships between unstructured data? What in particular is Censia doing that is really cutting edge in the way that we can not only categorize people, but also extract the information that we need from a database?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we're doing a little bit of all of those things. So it's actually the combination of those things that allow us to be successful. And I think the big thing for us was not just once we had this super structured, clean data set where we could go, okay, all these titles mean the same. Okay, these titles in this company are at this seniority. This is how the equivalent of that over here. Oh, these companies own these companies. Oh, these people were there during those acquisitions. Like
Right.
understanding people, think about founders, right? People are driven to find people that have scaled organizations. They started something, they've had an idea,
Right.
and they've built that idea into actually something. They've sold that, or they've raised capital for that. They've gone through this different journey than if you look at your profile, you probably wrote about yourself and skills, right? So my number one skill on LinkedIn is social media marketing. I couldn't do that if you had a gun to me. I have no idea how to social media market. Like
Sure.
I mean, I don't, it's not my thing. And yes, things that are not on my profile, I've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. I've bought companies, as I said, I've sold companies. I've been through all this type of growth and ups and downs, and all that stuff is much more relevant when you think about experience to a company and who's actually going to be able to do that. And so what we figured out was that as we started to, once we had structure, we could build intelligent algorithms around search in a very different way. We could be able to search people based on track record and performance and future capability. We can look at people we weren't just looking at what they say, but actually what that means. What is the actual intention of that? Okay. You ran sales at this company. What is that company? What industry is it in?
Sure.
Was it a leader in that industry? Was it a Series A company? Was it a seed company? And you grew into Series A? Did you go just that kind of knowledge on people is super powerful. And we do that across hundreds of millions of people. So it all of a sudden really allows when a decision needs to be made in kind of an instant, you're looking at an entire market of capable people rather than dripping people to a client. And all of a sudden they have to then make a decision. They're like, is there more?
That's right.
Who else is out there, right? Like if you're looking at everyone that's out there and you look at the actual data, what is extraordinary is when you look at data based on capability and track record, talent looks nothing like you would think it looks.
Right.
They don't all go to the same school. They don't all look the same way. They all are very, very different. And they have one thing in common is that they have performed in this category at this level.
Yeah.
And so it's something that we get really excited about. But as far as the technology that we use, we actually have had to use different ways of dealing, different variations of AI and machine learning throughout each step of this process. So what we use to create intelligent search on our own database is very different than the things that we had to use to structure our data.
Right.
And we're always thinking about what's the next thing to come. So, I don't know if that helps answer that question. But
No, it absolutely does. And it's so fascinating thinking about talent and being able to find talent relevant for the job. And like you mentioned, scaling a company at a seed level versus a Series C level is a completely different set of skill sets. And being that you can finally start to extract this information and help companies find individuals with those minute skill sets or particular skill sets, have you seen any changes into where people are finding these employees? Have you seen any trends kind of shifting as companies are now kind of forced to find labor in more or in alternative ways or in alternative places and methods, or being a little bit more intelligent about those that they hire? Because it's not, I don't think it's of any, everyone's aware that the microclimate is what it is, and VC funding is a little bit more strapped and companies are having to perform more intelligently. But have you seen any trends? Where are people finding talent now? And are you seeing talent and finding talent in a different direction? Are you seeing it moving in a different direction?
Yeah, it's a great question. For sure. I think that over the last 3 years, there's been enormous amounts of changes on even how talent teams have to operate in. Even before that, people would ask where you went to school, what your grade point average was. Like that is so full in a world where we're questioning what the future of education is going to look like. That's so interesting.
Right. Right.
In addition to that, was prior to COVID or prior to the pandemic, we had a lot of people hired based on location. And so then all of a sudden that goes away and people, how am I supposed to be thinking about hiring? And one of the things that we push is always to think about hiring for the future state. It is a critical piece of what we talk about and how we think through delivering on a client success is like every person you're looking for is like, okay, if you're here, where do you want to be in 2 years? Because it's about people that have done that consistently and been successful in that. If it's a new product launch, it's a new product launch in a category that needs to be disruptive at mid-market level. Okay,
sure,
I've done that before. And so looking at that, but I think what is really cool to your point is it really disrupts what success looks like. They start to look at one of the cool things in our platform is you can go company first. So you can go show me all the companies in cybersecurity that have been through hypergrowth that, are focused on the enterprise. Like, great, who were the key people that built that company or those companies and who's there now? Who's there during the time of scale? And it was partly as I started Censia, people kept using the same analogy. They'd be like, everyone wants the CMO of Airbnb when Airbnb was going through crazy growth. And I kept that just stayed so close to my head of like, yeah, we all want the people that really drove the difference. And I think it is around what we figured out was that was a lot harder to do than we thought. And so one of the big things was we believed in the future of the industry. Yeah. We wanted to help all of HR tech become intelligent and really use AI and get beyond just SQL databases and keyword searches. How do we start to look at, people differently and how do we start to change? How do we build the future of what talent technology is going to look like? And so our platform is all API first because what we see is we're seeing so many other companies build faster, more efficiency, more innovation on top of now not having to solve, oh God, how do I structure all these company names? How do I structure these titles? What does this mean? They're not spending, even for our clients, there's no onboarding process of teaching your recruiters Boolean string. It's crazy that we are still doing that at a time Spotify can tell us the next great song we never imagined we'd love that we fall in love with. And Zillow is going to tell us if our house is going to appreciate, but we're still typing keywords in to find our next best employee. It's just so foreign. So it's really, really exciting we just kept hearing from customers what they struggled with. It was really about solving the pain point they had and where they had the biggest bottleneck.
Yeah. And how, as a founder of a company that works within the HR space, how do you differentiate from, say, like a regular ATS system or a job search? What is the conversation? What is the conversation that you have that lead to creating a client relationship that helps overcome? And it's more of a selfish question for me, but yeah, I'm just curious about how you kind of move past those other incumbents that are nice tools, but don't necessarily get you to the result faster than you would have with something very similar to what they were using before.
Yeah. So we really never want a customer to rip out what system they use. And the reason is I never wanted to be in the business of adoption. Teaching people to change one of the things I've learned through this long journey, but also I have a team of people two other co-founders that also have been through their own journeys. And they're like, let's not do that, right? Let's not teach people to get off of what they're currently using and now start using something new. And so a big part is that we first built the platform, and then we created all the integrations into the big HCMs, ATSs, CRMs, so that our clients could actually all of a sudden they're going from a static database of people that are all the people they've once interviewed or they found and they've recruiters all day are basically building pipeline, and it's all sitting static. So the day that was entered, if it was entered correctly, it was accurate, and now it's no longer accurate. In addition to that, it's really hard to keep people at the top of your mind of, okay, who's really good at this? In addition to that, they were entered there and only are searchable in a way of, did they write this word on their profile and I can find them? And instead of that, what we say is, all right, now we're going to build this. We're going to basically, you're going to keep your front end, but we're going to be the intelligent cloud on the back end. So all your existing data gets up to date. It stays up to date. It's now intelligent. You can now search it based on much more intelligent search. You can do searches based on show me CFOs of SaaS companies that have been through an IPO with over $1 billion in revenue that are female. It's like seconds later, you see that, right?
Yeah.
You're not going, what would those women put on the calls?
Yeah. Right.
Like
Yeah.
what are the keywords exactly that would allow us to see that? It would know. You would take this, you'd have this whole spider chart of things that had to come together. And that was the big thing for us, is that we realized a lot of interesting people information sits on platforms, and there's a lot of interesting information around companies that sits on other platforms. And it's actually this magical combination of the two that allows us to see the intersection of where people, what they did inside companies.
Wow. Yeah. It's interesting. It's incredible to see the ability for them to have such a insight into talent to companies and find individuals who have these skill sets. Because like you mentioned, it's too challenging otherwise. And I guess my question around talent in particular is, how is the experience going to change for those being recruited? And talk a little bit about what you've seen on that end. If I'm, say, a CEO of a company and I've led it into growth, and maybe I'm looking for a transition or a new change or to do the same thing at another company, what is that experience now versus what it has been prior, and waiting on LinkedIn and maybe looking at my other job searches? How is that communication just that much more easily facilitated and successful?
Yeah. So I think that the biggest piece is that when a couple of things that have happened. Number one are looking at the rate of which talent that has been hired is diverse. That has been something we are super proud of. We are sitting with over 70% of people that have been hired on our platform in the past 12 months are diverse. That is nuts. And not diverse searches. They were the best people. And it is so cool when all of a sudden you level the playing field and give everyone equal opportunity to be seen. Not even equal outcome opportunity, but equal opportunity to be seen. That changes the game. It all of a sudden you're looking at people not from, what's crazy is actually underrepresented communities will underrepresent themselves not knowingly. And so women, for example, put 40% less skills on their resumes and profiles than their equal counterpart men. Yeah. That's crazy. So in a case where you're looking at, let me look for keywords, well, they're going to underrepresent themselves in that area. And so what all of a sudden would change is you could start to look at people evenly, which meant that if you were a founder and somebody is like, I am looking for a founder that has been through early stages, that has raised Series A funding, that in this space, you're going to be seen. And that's a really cool thing. You don't have to worry about that. But the recruiters also know why that person showed up. So they're looking at the way that they're actually show up and the way that we communicate talent. It gives them so much of the narrative they need to be able to actually talk to talent. Because now they know the things that you've done, what you've been through, what industries you have knowledge in. They can ask much more intelligent questions. And it shows a lot of talent hate how often they're reached out to for jobs that they would never do. It's just like, they're not even at all aligned with what they do. And it is a hard process, and it's critical, I think, for talent that they have an opportunity to be engaged with properly. The other thing is we do so much on analytics piece internally. So being able to look at talent internal or inside of organizations, or even talent as, think of it on an analytics standpoint. When you go, we had a Fortune 500 client of ours go, hey, can you analyze the top 300 people in our organization and compare them against these other organizations? Like, how should we be developing this talent in a way that those guys are doing or these other companies are doing, but we're not doing? What should we be adding to this team that we're not currently adding? Like, who is the high performer group in this team? And it's so interesting that data can really answer those questions in a way that they've never been able to have answered before. So I think also, even once people are in companies, it's about constantly keeping an eye on those people to be able to go, hey, this person's really killing it. Like, give them another opportunity over here, rather than kind of looking at everybody. A lot of times internally inside of organizations, they have very little data on their own employees. Most of the time, external recruiters have more information on an employee base than their own company. And that's another thing that we really wanted to change. So it is about giving companies information so that they can actually retain, grow, and develop their own employees. Yeah.
It's incredible to think about this, the whole diversity kick, where just leveling the playing field and allowing information known about individuals and companies at the certain times and responsibilities, and creating a real, an interesting culmination of that experience to give an accurate depiction of their background. I mean, one founder has said it before on the show, it's the best companies are the ones that hire the best talent first and create great teams, and they win. And I was like, that's pretty simple, but it's so hard to do.
It's
so many
and
ways.
It's always, if I had to be one message for every person in the audience, always bat above what you think, like always bat above your weight class.
Yeah.
Go after the greatest people you can, because you'd be very surprised at the caliber of talent that want to join a passionate visionary founder that is going after something big and believing in that. And a lot of times, I think we as entrepreneurs are like, oh, I could never get that person. Like, in the beginning, you hire that first time I built the company, I like hired my friends, and I was like, these guys aren't really performing, but like, shoot, they're my friends. I can't let them go. And so like, also one of the things is when I started Censia, I was like, I'm shooting for the day that I have to hire my replacement. Like, I'm not going to be the CEO that can always take us through every stage of growth. I mean, as a founder, that's one of the more common things, but every person, I always tell this to my team, is like, how awesome would it be if you outgrew your own capabilities? Like, be prepared for that, because this is one of the things as companies grow, the team's not always the same at each stage of growth. It needs to be different. And so being able to communicate that and get people passionate about constantly seeing the next opportunity is building the bench of people that are going to take us to the next level. And it might be some of the same people, and it might not be. It's okay, because we're all on this journey together. And it is a really cool, I think that's one of the cool pieces, is you do need to hire a great bench of talent and do it first.
Yeah.
It's the difference. That is the biggest difference maker between success and failure. I think it's great people and how aligned they are.
Yeah.
If they're misaligned, like, it's really difficult. If they're aligned, like everyone's going in the same direction and everyone knows their part and they're all doing it at a high caliber, everything kind of goes up and to the right.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well said. What are some of the biggest challenges that Censia faces today?
I think that despite like they just took all the banks away. I'm just kidding. I think that we are growing at a very fast pace, and I'm a huge believer in focus on the product and the customer, and everything else follows. Like, we are such a customer first company, and I love that. We will never change that. It is actually scaling at the pace that we have to scale the team, and making sure that we are focused on people that are always putting that first.
Yeah.
Happy customers scale, grow, refer others. They give you feedback. They constantly make you better. And that's been a really big part of it. I think also we are living in a time over the last 3 years where entrepreneurs have to be so tough.
Yes.
It's one thing or the next, kind of on constantly, and being able to lead the team with that calmness and communication and transparency. So I think it's what we don't know is going to come. That's probably one of the bigger challenges, and always setting up for the right kind of growth.
Right. Yeah. If everything goes though, what's the long-term vision for Censia?
World domination.
Yeah. I love that.
I mean, I think that this is the most exciting time to be doing what we're doing, and to see change in our industry, the way that we're seeing it. We're watching, I don't know if any of you are watching Yellowstone, but there's the prequel to Yellowstone, which is 1923, and Harrison Ford's in it. It's really good. But there's a moment at the time they're showing that there are cars on the road and horses, and they're taking away like where they tie up the horses for parking. Horses. And you're watching this like getting electricity and having like refrigerators and cars. They're like, why do we need this stuff? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel we're doing this in this industry where all of a sudden creating what comes from true efficiency gain with AI is unbelievable, because you're not replacing the stuff that like really strategic, critical work that humans are doing. You're replacing the mundane stuff that they spend 80% of their time on, and it's taking away from the time they're spending actually really spending time with the right talent and having the right conversations and bringing the right people into organizations. if you're spending 80% of your time just trying to find those people, it's a really big mismatch. So it's really cool to see all of a sudden kind of what happens when they don't have to spend that time anymore. And they're like, oh my gosh, like I can do 2 times, I can actually make 2x more hires a year because I'm not spending time doing this. Or I can now spend this much more time with candidates, vetting them, making sure they're right and understanding or really knowing my own employees that are doing great. Like that's a very cool thing to see. But where the talent industry is largely still built on, especially if you go higher up and more into the executive, it's built on a lot of people that know a lot of people. And it's interesting to see that change and go, and that's so good, those people, but let's also make sure that we're looking at everyone else that qualifies for this too.
Yeah. It's so exciting to see what kind of can come from the more intelligent tools and the increased productivity and efficiency, but also the insights, which is, I think, a huge component that's missing. And in that recipe, you can only see the amount of success that companies will have attracting the right talent. I love this next section. I call them my founder FAQs, but I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions and then we'll see where we get. So first question is, what's particularly hard about your job?
Getting sleep. Can't schedule that in very well. Eating, basic thing. Self-care. I love what I do. And that means that I probably do it more often than I should.
Yeah.
So I think I have to, as part of our onboarding process, I'm always like, I will email you at 3 a.m. Please do not know that you do not have to respond. You respond when you start work. Like, do not respond. It's not urgent. It's just that's at the top of my mind in that moment. So also just creating I don't want the culture built on my own patterns.
Right.
That's kind of a joke, but also really true is as founders, we need to be, I have unbelievable peers and a peer network that I rely on a lot to kind of teach me and share experiences, and I share experiences, and we all kind of help each other through these tough times. And I think it's one of the biggest recommendations I have for entrepreneurs is build a peer group. Reach out to people, build that network of peers, and you'll see that you're actually doing pretty well.
No, 100%. And one thing specific to you and your experience and your background, for founders who are, say, looking to put themselves in a position to be acquired or to build partnerships, maybe go through an acqui-hire or some variation of it, go with strategic partners. What are some ways that they can best set themselves up so that they can attract those types of opportunities, whether it's acquisitions or partnerships? What have you seen that has been successful in your journey? Not only obviously building great product, focusing on your customer and scaling and operating at a really efficient, but how can founders put themselves in a position to be more attractive, say for an acquisition or otherwise?
I think that it's based often on, we as founders don't often take the time to go, okay, what is our eventual outcome here? So I've heard entrepreneur after entrepreneur kind of be like, we're going to go public and it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar company. And like, that's all great. But have you run the analysis of what would it take to get there? And so if it's, I want to be acquired, whether it's an acqui-hire, whether it's acquisition, understanding what company is the right one and how do you start to nurture and develop those relationships where it isn't, I found the best partners didn't come from just one person inside. It actually came from a number of people inside that were all kind of singing the same tune, and whether people from outside were like, hey, you should talk to this company. It's really great. Like, you're doing all the right things. And even getting them as clients, that is something that it comes from this multi-touch approach that has to be built out. And I think that that's one of the things that we sometimes fail to think through is, or we don't fail to think through, we just don't have time. So they're like, okay, let me plan out this journey and then put myself in the right places. I think also sometimes the hard thing is that oftentimes people kind of forget that the acquirer sometimes is the competitor. And so how do you actually enable that? If that's the goal, how do you figure out a way that you can enable that company to be better with what you have versus try and be like, we're the better version of that thing.
Right.
Well, then that thing isn't going to be that interested in acquiring.
Right.
It's a much tougher battle. So I think that's also the case with good competitive, looking at the competitive landscape and being like, all right, like here we all are, but actually we're all different. Like I always say, some people will ask me about certain competitors and I'm like, well, if we're ever at the same party, somebody's at the wrong party. Like we should never sell the same thing because we actually deliver our product very differently. So while they have this way and they have that way. And it's like, I also am very clear around like, okay, these people focus on the blue collar worker. These people focus on the white collar worker. Like the executive market is largely underserved and we focus on that first, even though we can solve across the board. We really come in and are like, we're going to help you here. And so I think that also really knowing where your strength is in your categories also really helps people understand how they can leverage you, partner with you, and eventually acquire you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love to ask this next question because I love how founders extract knowledge out of anything they ingest. So there's no rules to this, but whether it's early in your career or now, what books or people have influenced you the most?
Oh, so much. So many. Principles by Ray Dalio is probably one of the better books that I think about that all the time. Ben Horowitz also wrote a book called The Hard Things About Hard Things.
Sure.
And it is one of my favorites. Like I always look back at the books that have influenced me the most. If there's a tremendous amount of highlights in there, it's like kind of broken pages that fall out. Like I'm like, yeah, that's it. Like, and I look at those. There are a few books that I just continue to turn to, and I think that Principles was more around how I structured things, and The Hard Thing About Hard Things was more around me understanding that I wasn't screwing up as bad as I thought.
Yeah,
and so they both had their reason, and I think that as I've looked at continuous education around it, it is now I'm much more interested in kind of books that are going to drive me in a different way of thinking.
Yeah.
But if they still somehow connect to, can I think differently about what I'm doing?
Yeah.
I'm really attracted to things that are people that have built businesses in a different way than they shook up the business model. They shook up how to do things.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly interested in how did people think outside the box? And it kind of helps me think about how to think outside the box.
I love that. I love the anecdotal stories as well. It really kind of helps you.
Yeah.
I mean, humans, we compare things. We like to see how our life fits into a different scenario and all this. And the reason I love to ask that question, like I mentioned, is the way we ingest things as founders also is a function of that as well. And how that translates into what we do day to day. And I know we're coming up to the close of the episode, but before we give you a chance to give us all your plugs, if there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have or that you would have liked to answer?
No. I love that you're doing this, and I think we all have things to learn. So I think it's awesome, and I hope that it was helpful.
Yeah, it was incredibly helpful. Not only learn about your background experience, but also what you're doing and the insights that you have, especially with talent. Talent is something that's becoming extremely more and more coveted. As like you said, founders have to be more strategic about their building their teams and how they're operating. But last little bit, tell us where we can find Censia. Give us your website. Give us you as a founder. Where we can find Joe Riley. Give us your LinkedIn's. Where can we not only be a fan of you as a founder, but also of the company and what you're working on?
Awesome. Well, you can find us at Censia.com. It's CENSIA. And if you want to follow me, I am on LinkedIn at Joanna Riley. I'm also Joanna Riley on Twitter and Instagram. And so please follow.
Amazing, Joe. It's been such an incredible conversation. I'm so excited to share with my audience, and I hope you enjoyed yourself on the show. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.